without mentioning high school football. Did you know that the very first football game played at the Orange Bowl was a high school game? And at one time, schools like Miami High, Jackson, and Edison all used the Orange Bowl as their home field. Well, in the 1950s, a new school burst onto the scene with an energetic coach. And by the 60s, they became the best high school football program in the United States, winning 4 national championships. Our guest today was a member of some of those teams, and not only a member of those teams, he's a Gables lifer. He was a teacher, coach, and also for 25 years, the athletic director at Coral Gables High. Welcome to the show, Harold Cole. Harold, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here, and always happy to talk about Coral Gables High School.
Harold, you have over 50 years of an affiliation with Coral Gables High School. Talk about growing up in Coral Gables. You actually went to Coral Gables Elementary. You also went to Ponce de Leon Junior High. What was it like growing up at that time?
Back then, it was like Camelot. I mean, it was a great place to grow up. Everything was safe. Even as a young kid, I could walk home from Coral Gables Elementary to my house, which was very close and still there, where my mom lived, very close to the Coral Gables Youth Center, which actually where the Coral Gables Youth Center was the initial land where the University of Miami was before the new campus was built.
Mm-hmm. Now, Coral Gables High School actually opened in 1950, but before Coral Gables High, there was another school called Ponce de Leon High School, which played in the very first football game in the Orange Bowl against Edison. And it later became the junior high school.
Exactly.
And you attended that school. Do you remember your days there?
Exactly. I went to the elementary school and then and we were at Ponce. And by the time we went to Ponce, it was a junior high. And it actually, the first classes that actually took place at Gables High School, even though it was built in 1950, the first classes were in 1951. And the very first football coach was not Nick Cody's. It was a guy, Joe Kratulis, who was at the very beginning, he was the very first coach for the first year. And he was also the head baseball coach. He was a little bit of everything, head of the PE department. And so Nick had come down here at an all-star game. He was coaching college at the time and got a chance to see Coral Gables, and they hired him at that time. And from that point on into early 70s, when he retired, it was all Nick Cody's and Coral Gables High School football. And he won his first time that he actually beat Miami High and won the state championship was 1956.
Yeah, you mentioned the 1956 team, which is the first championship team. Your first experiences with Coral Gables football actually began before you were even a student. You were actually a fan growing up, and you went to those games at the Orange Bowl. What was the atmosphere like at those games?
It was amazing. I mean, going back and looking at it now, some of those great games, and some of the history of going there. The 1958, I'm going back in history, but the 1958 game was an unbelievable Gables Miami High game. They're in the Orange Bowl, and both teams were undefeated at that particular time, and usually it's late in the season. And Miami High kicked off to us, and the guy who caught the ball, back near the goal line, was the great All-American guy, Ted Saucell, who ended up going to Missouri, then transferring back. But everybody was just, really keying on him. He catches the ball, and as he's going to his left, he hands it off to a guy who it takes it all the way for a touchdown. Okay. And so we take the opening kickoff on a reverse for the touchdown. What a lot of people don't know or remember the person that he handed the ball off to and took it all the way for a touchdown was the same guy who scored the very first touchdown on a kickoff for the Miami Dolphins, Joe Auer.
Joe Auer, yes.
But he was the guy in 1958 who got the ball from Ted Saucelle on the reverse. Gables won that ball. You know, they beat him the first time in 56, lost to him on 57, 1958. Gables, well, when I say that they won that ball game, and to the day he died, Nick Cody said his greatest mistake he ever made as a football coach. Every year there was a special game that was played Thanksgiving. It was I'm trying to remember what they called it. But
was it the Kiwanis game, or was it?
Yeah, it wasn't Kiwanis, but it was a game that was played every Thanksgiving, and usually the team that won, usually for a long time, Miami High played a team from up north, and they always brought a team down to play Miami High. Well, Gables beat them in 1958, and when it came for that game, for whatever reason, they had a difficult time, or Miami High just said, give us another chance. And Nick agreed to play Miami High a second time that year. After he'd already beat him the first time, he played Miami High a second time for Thanksgiving and got beat 28-0. And he said that at that point we had gone in all confident, thinking, no problem, got beat, got embarrassed. And he said, I will never, ever play a team like that. Anybody, whoever it is, to play them again. And that was an unbelievable, Nick, like I said, to the day he died, you say all the great things he did, and he'll always bring up the mistake of playing Miami High twice in 1958.
Back in those days, there were crowds of like 20, 30, 40,000 people come out for high school football. Now, at that time, there were no Miami Dolphins. There were no major professional teams. And the University of Miami wasn't quite a national power at that time.
Not at all.
Talk about how big high school football was in those days, in the 50s and 60s.
Well, there weren't that many schools. So the reality of it was there were certain games every year that, played in the Orange Bowl game, and like I said, the largest crowd still to this day in that Orange Bowl was the 1965, was a year after I graduated, because I graduated in 65, but it was football season of 65, when we went into, played Miami High. We were both ranked. We were ranked 1 and 2 in the country, in the state at that particular time. And we had a 28-game winning streak. We had just won the state championship 2 times in a row, and we went into that ball game with Miami High, and they recorded. What's recorded is that there were 48,000. There were so many people that jumped up. They didn't have enough ticket sellers and enough security, so what the actual ticket count was 48,000 and something, and they said it was probably closer to 60,000 at that game.
Wow, 60,000 for a high school game.
And and that was an unbelievable game that Miami High did beat us at that game, and on a pass that went right through our defensive back's hands, looked like he was going to intercept it on a long pass. Went, for whatever reason, he went right through his hands. And kid Georgie Fernandez, I remember, a little short guy, caught the ball right on the run. It went right through his hands, caught it, and they end up winning the ball game 14-7.
I want to talk about 2 important people from that time period at Gables. First of all, the head coach, Nick Cody's. He came over to a brand new school, practically brand new school. Within a few years, within 6 years, he had him as a state champion. Within a couple more years after that, they were national champions, and you were part of, I think, the 1964 national championship team. How did Cody's develop that program? What made him such a special coach?
There were a couple of things going on at that time. He made sure that the feeding group coming out of Coral Gables Youth Center had some good people there. He put together an unbelievable staff at that particular time. His staff, a number of them, played at the University of Miami, coached at Curley, were somewhat local, and he had a great defensive coach, Jack McCluskey, who I worked with later on and coached with. A number of people, Sam Scarnecchia, who played at the University of Miami. Yeah. Dan Coughlin, who played and then left and went and coached for a number of years at the University of Florida. I mean, that was the whole thing. Miami High had a good staff, and Nick always coached everybody. And that was the whole thing. And early on when he was there, they played, they would play 2 games every year against Jacksonville Lee and Jacksonville Jackson. Usually played a team from Orlando. They and Miami High and Edison were in a conference called the Gulf Coast. And there were, like I said, even at that particular time, they always had good competition, but the youth program got better also. A lot of people didn't talk that much about it, but they had that's where I grew up, was the Coral Gables Youth Center, and the other one was the Southwest Boys Club, and had great kids. Those kids either went to Miami High or went to Gables, and initially all the kids went from there to Miami High, and then as time went along, he was a pretty good recruiter. Well, I mean, the kids, there was that borderline in between where a kid could, at that particular time, they had the choice between Miami High and Gables. They were, there was a certain area right in there, and they had their choice. And originally, when Gables first became a high school, and especially even before that, Miami High was the place to be. I mean, going way, way back. And then after a while, Nick would go there, and he would be there, and made sure every kid at Ponce and at Shenandoah High School, those junior highs always had a Thanksgiving game. Not a touch type of game, touch football game every year. A color game. At Ponce, when I was there, it was the blue-gray game. Every year, they always look for officials to officiate that game, not just the PE coaches. Nick made sure that the coaches from Gables High School officiated and met with all of those kids at Shenandoah and at wherever they came from. He made sure, and South Miami High School wasn't there at the time. So all of those kids that were living in South Miami, the real good athletes, all came there also. When I say he was a good recruiter, he didn't go out and recruit kids that didn't belong to him, but the ones that had the choice to come to Gables High School. And he, as far as a coach himself, he had some, college experience. He was such an unbelievable motivator. Again, you had no facial hair, you had no long hair, and he left it up to the leaders, and he would give them shears or razors or that type of thing. If somebody came in and wanted to play and had that, guys, tell them what they need to do. He was very much of a disciplinarian. He was, but a great, great motivator. And there were certain football players that had a tough growing up, and I'm thinking of one particular guy, Harold Skipper. Harold Skipper was always, in trouble, but not getting, a situation where he was suspended or like that. But he was a guy after school across the street. There were always fights. He was always involved in it. He was just a tough kid. But he was somebody, if there was a party, you had to look out because Harold, Skipper was there. But he was a fullback, and so many times that was the type of guy that a lot of coaches, the coaches today, coaches back then, would just get rid of the kid. You don't want to fool with him. You don't want anything to do with him. But Nick would take that type of kid and he would work with them, take him under his wing, keep him out of trouble, sit there and counsel them with other coaches. The coaches really took care of the kids. And Harold Skipper, who I still stay in touch with to this day, left and went on and played at Alabama and then tore his knee up and then tried to come back and play here, but didn't. But, he was an unbelievable guy. But so many of those type of guys that really needed a Nick Cody's and that type of staff to get through, to get where they are today.
I've read stories where you guys would suit up over 100 players.
Oh, yeah.
And one particular player that I want to talk about was a teammate of yours named Larry Rentz, who was almost like a mythical figure in high school football at that time. There was a Miami Herald writer named Neil Amder who coined the phrase, "There's no defense for Larry Rentz," after he put on an amazing performance against Miami High. Talk about Larry and what kind of player he was in those days.
The guy, and again, he was so thin. Larry weighed maybe 135 pounds, and maybe like 6'1". And you couldn't say that he was fast, but he was quick. And anything he did he was a quarterback, he was a defensive back, he punted, he returned punts. He did a little bit of everything. And it was, but he was a great leader. He had discipline, this ability. He did stutter when he was very, very young. I mean, I knew him. I played against him. I was at the Gables Youth Center playing basketball, and he was playing basketball at Southwest Boys Club. And we always competed against each other. But when he came to Gables, and like you said, there was no defense for Larry Rentz. A couple of times he faked out, punted, and took the ball back on a punt. Our first state championship, when we beat Tampa Robinson, that very first game up there, Larry had an unbelievable game. And the only thing was that particular time when we played them, our junior year, we were getting beat 14-13 late in the ball game within the minute to go. Fourth down, Larry Rentz was in and played quarterback and threw an interception on fourth down, threw an interception in the end zone, and we were down 14-13. We had no timeouts left. Or maybe we had one timeout left. I'm trying to remember. And the kid from Tampa Robinson, you talk about a mistake. All he had to do was, he caught the ball. All he had to do was fall down. He tried to run it out. He had no reason to. All he had to do was put his knee down, and they could have run out the clock. But he tried to run the ball out, got out to, the 10, 12-yard line, got hit and fumbled the ball on trying to run the ball out. We recovered it, and with 30 seconds to go, we kicked a winning field goal and won the ball game 16-14. Right. But he faked a punt in that game to get us in scoring position earlier in the ball game. I think he had intercepted a pass, and he was just a great, great athlete who went on to play at Florida State, and he was the backup to Steve Spurrier at University of Florida. Yeah. And he, was his backup, then became the quarterback, but didn't do. And somebody else came in, and so they moved him to defensive back, and he started for him as a defensive back. Right. And he ended up playing for San Diego for a couple of years as a defensive back. But he was a guy who was a great football player both ways. He started in basketball for us. He was, I just remember one time, because I didn't play baseball, but he was our shortstop in baseball, and they had a big, and because we did have our own track there at Gables High School, he was the guy, and we had a big track meet that particular day, and it was really, really close. And on in between one of the innings, we were taking time. He ran down to the track field, had a pair of shorts underneath, took off his top of his pants and his top and won the won the high jump, and high jump like 6'4", came running back and came back in and played because they had somebody out in the field, but they were at that time it was you could re-enter, and he came back and got 2 hits after that in the baseball game, but they won the track meet because he ended up winning the high jump at that particular time. That's the type of athlete he was.
Oh, wow. I mean, you have obviously such a long affiliation with Coral Gables, not just as a student athlete, but later you became a teacher. Later you became an assistant coach in basketball.
I was an administrator.
Football.
I was the assistant to the principal.
And you were also athletic director for 25
years. Yeah.
What would you say is your proudest moment as working at Coral Gables High?
I think truthfully, some of the kids that what they've done, they're having some type of dealing with some of these kids, and when I see where they've not just obviously Frank Gore, who would have lunch virtually every day and sitting there with him and dealing with when his mother wasn't well, and a lot of things that people aren't even aware of. A kid like him, Mike Lowell, who worked in my office, and kids like that. Kids like John Bilma, Van
Waiters, I think. Right?
Van Waiters, and dealing with him because Van was a kid who played tight end for us and really wasn't being recruited that well. But fortunately, I had a good friend, guy Jerry Sullivan, who was coaching up at Indiana. He's coached in pros and at LSU as a receiver coach. Coached, I think, maybe even 1 year at the Dolphins. But we had become, good friends. And he had come down to recruit one of our running backs who had already said was going to Baylor. And he came in and we talked for a while. He says, "You have anybody else that, I need to talk to?" I said, "We've got a kid." I said, "He's been nothing but on the offensive side of the team. We played him at tight end, and we didn't throw the ball that much. But he's a tough kid. He's like 6'4", plays basketball, good student. He's a kid that needs to be on the other side of the football." And he sat there, talked to him, and came back later on and signed the kid. And Van Waiters went up to Indiana, started for them, made all Big Ten, ended up playing in the Super Bowl, and is in their Hall of Fame. All right. And, those are the type of things that, and I've run into them a number of times. Another kid is, we had at that time, I was still coaching the secondary. And I had Billy Roll.
Billy Roll, sure.
Was
Rodney Bellinger too, right?
Well, at that time, Rodney Bellinger was 5'8", 5'9" at that particular time, and very few people were recruiting him when he was a senior. That was the year after Billy was already at FAMU. And nobody, was recruiting. And I said, the kid can play. And it was already March. It was after signing date. And I called another guy who I'd become friends with because we were so close to the University of Miami, guy Kim Helton.
Oh, okay.
All right, who was at that time was the
offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Right?
And I called Kim. I said, "Do you know anybody at all?" This was March. I said, "Do you have anybody at all?" I said, "I've got a kid who played for me." I said, "I wouldn't be calling you, not to, I said, obviously not at Miami, but if you're out recruiting at a small school, something, just give the kid, somebody that give him a chance." He says, "Bring him over, the old man's here," which was Howard.
Right.
Said, "I'd like him to meet him. We just came out of a meeting, and we realize that we have an extra scholarship because somebody's not going to qualify academically, and we're just talking about who we're looking at, bring them by. So anyhow, I bring, Rodney, and I was also the head basketball coach at that particular time, and he was playing with, at that time. So I brought him over. He was hurting a little bit with his ankles, but, was playing. So I bring him over. He meets Howard, and he meets Kim, and, talk to him. We're in his office there, and he goes, "I'd like to see him run." And I'm going, "Oh gosh, his ankle's not great." And he's he says, "Kim, take him down. I just want to see him run a little bit." So he takes him downstairs, and I'm standing in the office with Howard, and he takes him down there, and a guy, Rocky Belk, was down there working out with a couple of guys. So he says, Howard goes like this, time him. He can't see, but he goes, "I want to time him." So they let him run against Rocky Belk, beats him. And Howard goes, "Okay, after he runs, what time is it?" And Kim goes, and I'm going, "No, he's never run 4.5 in his life." And Howard goes, "Hey, if he can run 4.5, maybe we can use him a little bit on special teams. Maybe, I don't know." So he goes like this, do it again, runs again. He goes, Howard goes, he goes like this, bring him up here. He talks to him. He goes them out, talks to me. He says, "Can the kid play?" I said, "I don't know that he'll ever line up and play for you, but he'll be at practice every day. He'll work his tail off. He will never embarrass you." And he's a kid that you want to send him down on, he's caught, punts for me. The kid is a kid that will never, ever embarrass you. He goes, "Yeah, I got that one scholarship. He seems like a nice kid." I said, "Well, I was looking for a small school for him." And he goes, "We'll take him." And they signed him. And the history was with Rodney. And what he was able to do in the national.
Had a great '84 Orange Bowl against Nebraska. He was amazing in that game.
The '83.
Yeah.
He lined up whatever side was the receiver.
It was Irving Fryer?
Yeah, I couldn't think of his name. Wherever he lined up, that's where Rodney lined up. And then Rodney was a second round pick with Buffalo. And played with them for a couple of years till he hurt his neck. And I still stay in touch with all those guys to this day. Very good friends with, I just saw Rodney. I just saw Billy a couple of weeks ago because Billy's been at FAMU, but he has to take this year off because of his retirement. But I stay in touch with all of those kids, Royce Clay, and actually the particular group and a guy, Danny Couch, was our strong safety. Royce Clay was a corner, and that particular four guys in the secondary, to this day, is the only secondary that go through an entire season not giving up one touchdown pass the entire year.
Wow.
Anyhow, like I said, Rodney lives in Atlanta. And he is the representative for the NFL alumni in the Atlanta, group and everything like that. But that really, when we're talking about people and that I've had an opportunity to stay in, and there's a bunch more of those. Al Del Greco.
Sure. Great kicker.
Yeah. What people weren't, he was my backups with that group he was a strong safety and played some, but all he did was kick. But the one thing I made him, the reason as a defensive back, he had to learn to tackle. In 2 ball games when he was playing with Green Bay and kickoff, guys got loose and he made the tackles. And afterwards, I'd always get a call or a little note from him saying all of that, tackling you made us do to this day, I always remember all I had to do is how I would tackle and what I would do. And that's what I said when you asked me, the different kids and the different people that I had an opportunity to work with. they were great for me to have these type of memories.
Well, Harold, thank you for joining us on the show. Before you leave, though, I want to ask you about a project that you're currently working on. You're a member of a committee for the Dade County High School Sports Hall of Fame. Can you briefly talk about that?
Yes, the reality of it is for years we've had all of these great athletes that have come out of Miami-Dade County. Schools, public and private, have their own individual school Hall of Fames, but we do not. And with all around the country, most of the major municipalities have their county high school Hall of Fames. Dade County has not had one ever, and a number of people have approached me and said it's well beyond the time that we should have it. And so I am the executive director. I've put together, I think, a pretty impressive group of board of directors, a subcommittee for each one of the sports, and we now will have the Miami-Dade Sports High School Hall of Fame here in Dade County, and it's in the process. We're moving forward with it, and we're hoping sometime around next March or April of actually having our first induction.
Well, Harold, thank you so much for joining us. I always enjoy the great stories, and you really are a pillar of the community for such a long time. We're really glad that you were able to take the time to join us today.
Thank you, Joe and Jay. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I'm Jay Rao for Miami's Community News, and we'll see you again next time with another Go